Welcome to our March 26th Sunday school lesson. A happy birthday to my mother, whose birthday is on the 26th. And welcome to the Beaver Creek Presbyterian Church Kitchen Sunday School class. You guys, I know, use my videos to help with your class. And there was a request that I come back out to the pond when the irises were blooming. They're not blooming yet, as you can tell, but it's such a beautiful day I said I would come out anyway. And today is a day in which we discover about someone burying something out in the ground, and I'm not sure that we have any buried treasure here at Lee Lane Farm, but it is a good day to be outside. Well, let me kind of preface our lesson by telling you a little bit of a story. When I was a good bit younger, Lee and I came into a little bit of money. And we knew that we wanted to invest the money. We knew that partly because her father, who was a great businessman, used to always tell me at the time when I was in my mid-20s, the one thing you have that you will never be able to have again is time. And so invest as much as you can now, because time is almost like magic with investments. You get to ride the highs and the lows, and you go through, but over time you're going to do well if you invest now. So we knew we wanted to invest. We also knew, or at least I guess I should say I knew, that I wanted to invest as well as I could. And I'm a pretty thrifty person. My children would say that I'm cheap. And so I really didn't want to pay somebody else to invest money if I thought maybe I could do it myself. And so I literally went out and bought the book Investing for Dummies, which I actually highly recommend. And it taught me lots about investing, and I was able to invest that money at the time, and hopefully it will be there for us when we're ready to retire. One of the rules that I learned in that book is that when you're investing, it is quite possible to invest way too conservatively, and it is those who invest most conservatively who actually are risking the most. Because as I've heard some people say, well, I want to invest $1 and I want to know in 10 years that I still have that dollar. The problem with that is that, of course, in 10 years, there's this thing called inflation. And in 10 years, that dollar is not going to be worth nearly as much as it is now. So you may still have your $1, but you have lost so much in value that your conservative investing cost you. It's going to cost you the spending power that you would have had. And in a sense, today's parable is all about both of those two lessons, that time is so critical for us, and that we may need to make sure that we don't invest out of fear too conservatively, but that we invest our lives in a way that will truly, truly bear fruit. And this is the second of the three parables in Matthew 25 that we are studying over a 3-week period. And so let me share with you now the parable of the talents, Matthew 25, 14 to 30. For it is as if a man going on a journey summoned his slaves and entrusted his property to him. To one he gave 5 talents, to another 2, to another 1, each according to his ability. Then he went away. At once the one who had received the 5 talents went off and traded with them and made 5 more talents. In the same way the one who had 2 talents made 2 more talents. But the one who had received the 1 talent went off and dug a hole in the ground and hid his master's money. After a long time, the master of those slaves came and settled accounts with them. Then the one who had received the 5 talents came forward, bringing 5 more talents, saying, Master, you handed over to me 5 talents. See, I have made you 5 more. His master said, Well done, good and trustworthy slave. You have been trustworthy in a few things. I will put you in charge of many things. Enter into the joy of your master. And the one with the 2 talents also came forward, saying, Master, you handed over to me 2 talents. See, I have made you 2 more. His master said to him, Well done, good and trustworthy slave. You have been trustworthy in a few things. I will put you in charge of many things. Enter into the joy of your master. Then the one who came forward with the 1 talent also came, saying, Master, I knew that you were a harsh man, reaping where you did not sow, and gathering where you did not scatter. So I was afraid, and I went and I hid your talent in the ground. Here, you may have what is yours. But his master replied, You wicked and lazy slave. You knew, did you, that I reap where I do not sow, and gather where I do not scatter? Then you ought to have invested my money with the bankers at least, and on my return I would have received what was my own with interest. So take that talent from him and give it to the one with 10 talents. For to all those who have, more will be given, and they will have an abundance. But from those who have nothing, even what they have will be taken away. As for this worthless slave, throw him into the outer darkness, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth." Well, that's a tough parable in lots of ways. And of course, I think we recognize immediately, in spite of my opening, this parable is not a parable about the wise investing of money. It's talking about something much more important even than money, and that is the way that we invest. Maybe we could even say the way that we spend the lives that we have been given. You may remember a few weeks ago when we covered the parable of the generous king. A slave had a 10,000 talent debt, and we talked about the fact that a talent is worth about 15 years worth of a common laborer's wages. And so this 10,000 talent debt would have been around 150,000 years worth of wages, and that Jesus was intentionally exaggerating. And I think in a sense in this parable he's exaggerating as well. He gives to one person 75 years worth of wages, and then the second person who gets the 2 talents, that's 30 years worth of wages, and the third one who gets only 1 talent is still 15 years worth of wages. This landowner or this businessman is giving an awful lot of money, awful lot of responsibility to these 3 servants. And I think we need to recognize, I think, a couple of things here. One is, of course, this parable that things are standing in for other things, and the man is going on an extended journey. This is not going to be just a weeks-long vacation. If this were a short vacation, he could just leave the money invested wherever he had it invested. There's another rule I learned in investing for dummies, and that is that you come up with a good investing plan, and then you invest it and forget it. You don't have to mess with it and make a lot of changes over time. If you've got a good plan, it's going to stand the test of time. But you do have to make adjustments from time to time, of course. And so this guy is going on a long journey, and he can't just invest it and forget it. He needs to give it over to these other people so that they can take care of it for him while he's gone and make whatever adjustments need to be made. Now, we note that because we are coming close to the end of the Gospel of Matthew. This is Matthew 25. Matthew just has 28 chapters. And it's going to end, of course, with Jesus ascending to the Father and us finding ourselves in those in-between times, in between the resurrection and the second coming of Christ. And the early church was very sure that what was going to happen was Jesus is going to come back very quickly. But let's look for just a moment in chapter 28 at what Jesus tells them and then consequently us to do with our time while he is away. He says, "Go therefore and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit, and teaching them to obey everything that I've commanded you. And remember, I am with you always, even to the end of the age." And we call that the Great Commission. Well, if Jesus were ascending to the Father and a week or so later was going to come back, he wouldn't say, "Go into all the nations." There wasn't time to do that. He would just say, "Hang on, I'll be right back. Just leave everything like it is." But that's not what happens. Jesus is ascending to the Father, and we now know, in a way that the early church didn't, that his delay was going to be tarried longer than anybody would suspect. Even if we were at that time, we would know, nobody at that time would have suspected that Jesus would tarry for more than 2 millennia, and yet that is where we are now, and that makes even more important that we pay attention to this parable. Because Jesus is investing in us, not merely our lives, but he's giving us his business. His business is to bring the gospel to all the world, to be a light to all the nations. Go into all the nations, baptize them, teach them, help them know all that you know. The business of Jesus is about bringing love and joy and peace and hope into a world that is full of hate and full of despair and full of disease and no sense of peace but strife instead, and a world that does not know joy. Christ is asking us to bring all of those things into the world. That's his business, and we can't just sit back and relax and wait. We have to be actively out there trading, doing the business that Jesus asks us to do. Well, second, and this is obvious, I've already mentioned it, he is not talking about money here, although money is perhaps part of it, but he really is talking about the way that we are to spend and invest our lives. And I think that's partly why he gives these kind of exaggerated things. It's hard to imagine a man going away for a time and leaving behind 75 years worth of wages with one person and 30 years worth of wages with another and 15 with another. It just doesn't really make sense. It's kind of an exaggeration, and yet how valuable are our lives? And I really want us to think maybe a little bit about how much life do we have left. We've already spent whatever we've spent of our lives, and that doesn't matter so much. What matters is what we're doing with the present and what we're going to do with the future. And some of us may have 15 years or less remaining. Some of us may have 30 years or less remaining. Some of us may have even 75 years remaining. How is it that we're going to spend those lives? And Jesus is telling us here, don't spend them by taking the easy route or the conservative route. He said instead saying risk something. And risking something is in part risking the way that we live. It's risking love. It's risking joy in a life when it's easier just kind of try to hold back things and not be particularly generous with anything. Some years ago, I remember a friend telling me that his church was going through a lot of difficulty, and attendance was dwindling, and the offering of plate, of course, was collection was dwindling, and the church was trying to decide, are we going to be able to survive or not? And the session, I think really wisely in some of their discussions, said, well, we kind of have a couple of choices here. We can just keep letting things slowly dwindle away until it's too late, and then we'll just sell out, and that'll be the end of it, and we'll kind of go out with a whimper. Or we can take some great risks. And if we're going to go out, let's go out with a bang. And now, to be honest with you, I don't even remember who it was that told me that story, and I don't know the end of that story, what happened to that church. But I think the point is so wonderful. Whether we're talking about a church or we're talking about our lives, do we want to play it safe for the rest of our lives and just let them kind of dwindle away? Or if we're going to go out, let's go out with a bang and be generous and really do things that are going to create a lot of attention, even if the attention ultimately might even be unwanted attention. Because anytime we love, anytime we offer joy to the world, it's going to come back to us with some hatred and with some opposition. We need to do it anyway. So what does it mean to take risks and not to play it safe? Well, we often hear this parable used as a stewardship emphasis. And God has given us so much money, and we need to make sure that we're returning our money to the church, returning our money to God, whether it's to the church or through other or worthwhile causes. And I think that's good. I think that's very important that we recognize that if I am investing all of my money in me, then essentially I am just burying it in a hole in the ground. And eventually I'm going to be put in a hole in the ground, and that's going to be the best of it. There's not going to be any great use of it. As someone once said, money is like manure. If you pile it up, it just stinks. But if you spread it around, you can do it a whole lot of good. And so I think the stewardship emphasis there is important. But it's not only about money, and it really isn't only about being generous, as much as it really is about taking risks. And taking risks means to risking loving. And this isn't necessarily about romantic love. It's really loving people who are hard to love, but kind of on the romantic side. And then we can take an example from this, maybe oddly enough, in the movie Men in Black, one of those movies. I think it might have been the second one. The character played by Will Smith is somehow trying to encourage the character that was played by Tommy Lee Jones, and he says, well, instead of me letting you say what he says, let me show you what he says and show you what happens.
Yeah, well, you know what they say, it's better to have loved and lost than never to have loved at all. Try it.
Well, it's better to have loved and lost than to never have loved at all. And I love the way that Tommy Lee Jones just kind of leans in and looks at him and says, yeah, you think so? Try it. Well, if we have loved and have lost, if we have risked and we have found that risk has caused us to have broken hearts, those that we tried to help weren't appreciative, those we tried to help took advantage of us, those we tried to love, somehow it didn't work. And it might be easy to say, well, I just want to bury my head or my talents, if you will, in the sand and not take that risk anymore. But that's not what Jesus is calling us. Jesus is calling us to be more like that Will Smith character. Take that risk. Do what it takes to be generous, to be profligate with our love and with our joy, to share it with others, because that's why we were given our lives. Well, our gospel is about loving people even if they are going to break our hearts, about taking a risk for joy, taking a risk for peace, taking a risk for reconciliation, even when it really is easier just to try to forget it all. Jesus has given us our lives. And that really reminds me of a poet that I only discovered in the last few years, but many of my friends have known about her for a long time, Mary Oliver. And maybe her favorite line in a poem that people repeat is, "Tell me, what is it you plan to do with your one wild and precious life?" And surely that's not just to squander it away, but it's to use it in ways that it bursts forth with love and with joy. That's what we want to do, but we have to do that. In order to do that, we have to counter our fears. We have to not try to go all conservative, try to bury whatever it is that we have in the sand to keep it, but we have to go forward and use it. Another one of her poems I love ends this way. She says about herself, "When it's over, I want to say all my life, I was a bride married to amazement. I was the bridegroom taking the world into my arms. When it's over, I don't want to wonder if I've made of my life something particular and real. I don't want to find myself sighing and frightened or full of argument. I don't want to end up simply having visited this world." Isn't that wonderful? Let us not say that we made of our lives, don't have to wonder if we made of our lives something particular or real, but let's make of our lives something particular and real. Let's not end our lives having sighed and been frightened and been just full of argument and simply visited the world, but instead let us make sure that we have lived our lives to the fullest, sharing the love and the joy of Christ with all those that we can share it with. So after hearing Jesus encourage us in this parable, after hearing Mary Oliver encourage and reflect, let me ask of you, tell me, what is it that you plan to do with your one wild and precious life? And then, whether you have 15 years or 30 years or 75 years left, go and do it. Amen.